Alrighty, 6 tips to win more games. With rank mode on the way, what better preparation than to break some bad habits and provide you with some simple tips to increase your win rate? Like always, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and bell icon to stay up to date on all of our new content. Alright, first tip starts with information. Everyone's first instinct is to wander the interweb for information in order to get better. This brings up the idea of clickbait. There's going to be tons of YouTube content with high skill players using Smurf accounts, and when you're just better than your opponent, you can casually win most matchups despite unorthodox strategies. Most unorthodox behavior comes in the form of weird builds or champions being played in untraditional roles. YouTube is littered with this kind of content, and players of all levels can get baited into building their characters horribly. I'm not saying all this content isn't fun or educational or even entertaining. Just don't copy item builds or strategies from these sources. Get off YouTube completely and visit a site like Ometa City. These kinds of sites tend to use compiled statistics that have a useful filter function. You can find skill order as well as items by level per slot. It's just a much better, less biased form of getting information. Don't get me wrong, these sites are not 100% all the time. But as a new or even average player, you have no way of determining which kind of information is good. So stick to something like Ometa City until your knowledge of the game has grown more. These things come with time. Don't overthink it as you get better and better. All right, with that off to the side, now we can get into the nitty-gritty of gameplay advice. These next 2 tips are going to help you with combating some common mistakes surrounding objectives. There has been an overimportance placed on neutral objectives like Fangtooth. The amount of games lost as a result of overforcing these objectives is crazy. Don't get me wrong, Fangtooth is very useful, especially when you gain access to the 4th Primal Fangtooth, which is a massive buff worth investing into. But each of the individual Fangtooths are not that important, especially in the early stages of the game. Having access to longer buffs or even out-of-combat movement speed have quality of life uses, sure, but most games are not going to be decided by these types of enhancements. You have to remember, the primal buff isn't until the 4th Fangtooth is slain. We don't want you to feel the kind of pressure and take poor fights for an objective that has literally no sway over the entirety of the match. You don't need to contest every single one. You need to think about how good or bad the fights you're about to take are. Make your decisions based off of that. Don't overforce the objective and lead your team to doom all for an inconsequential buff. And like we mentioned before, Fangtooth isn't the only objective players have been hyper-focusing on and wind up throwing over. Advice you're probably heard at one point or another is to focus on the destruction of towers in order to open up the map. You have to remember, doing damage to towers doesn't mean anything unless you take the whole structure. If they are standing, they will continue to dish out the same damage regardless of having full health or half health. A simple rule of thumb, if you can't destroy the tower in this moment, then there's something else you should be doing. If you can only destroy half a turret's life and trade for your death, it's not worth it because you didn't gain anything. You could be stealing enemy jungle or grabbing a buff that provides both experience and gold. Evaluating situations like these matter, and senseless deaths create direct and indirect disadvantages. Getting something is always better than getting nothing. The next tip involves tons of losses for both beginners and experienced players, and it literally happens at the very beginning of every match. Draft is a skill in and of itself, but there are some basic hero concepts that you should understand in order to overcome this trap. It is better to have an excess of attack damage on your team than it is to have an excess of magic dealers. Magic dealers' biggest flaw is rooted in how they deal damage. Mages tend to be burst reliant, and when their abilities go on cooldown, they lose a tremendous amount of their offensive capabilities. If you can weather the storm, their cooldowns leave you with a tremendous opportunity. Attack damage champions use abilities as well, but still retain a lot of their offense when they're on cooldown. This makes AD champions better in most matchups so long as you can survive the initial attack. This fact is what makes magical armor more valuable. The optimal team comp is generally 3 attack damage users, a support/tank, and a source of high magical damage. This makes counter itemization very difficult. If the enemy team builds attack armor, your attack damage users will still produce damage, but the mage is going to take over the game. If they build magic resist, then your attack damage users will go crazy. Now, you should always play what makes you have the most fun, but if winning is your priority, then you should keep this concept in mind. You will avoid a lot of losses and take advantage of bad team compositions in the future, all the while mitigating counter builds. Another tip for the draft includes the variety in which you play. Most loss streaks include a huge variety in heroes played. Think of playing a simple platformer like Mario, but imagine every press of the jump button is a different jump height. It'd be very hard to win that game that's so reliant on jumping. Now fast forward to a more complicated game like Predecessor. Every time you play a different champion, you're playing a more complicated game with not just a different jump height, but a different everything. Not only are you having to get used to the character, but you're having to play the game as well. And most players can't juggle this amount of change. So in order to win more games, let's limit the champion selection to 2 champions and play roles, let's say 2 roles. So being versatile can help champion select. I'm not saying that, but a huge variety is probably hurting you in the win column. Look at my good friend Pressure. As soon as he strays away from limiting his champion pool, his win rate plummets. So don't be like him and limit your champion pool. Less variety is going to equal more wins. Last but not least, we want to remind people that tempo means something. Most players fall into routine and start being creatures of habit. The game starts at level 1, and so your determination to find an early game advantage should always start at level 1. Whether that's invading red buff, sneaking around the fog wall with murderous intent, or even trying those cheesy take advantage of habits like entry into jungle. Every game deserves high tempo intent to win, and these aggressive actions can intimidate the enemy into giving you an early lead or even an early surrender. So with that being said, always be an aggressor, look for cheesy moves to start the game off, and start the game off as fast as humanly possible. With that being said, that's all we got for you guys today. If you liked our content, don't forget to like and subscribe. Jump into the comment section. Tell us your tips for winning more games. We want to increase win rates as much as possible, especially with ranked on the horizon. And like always, don't forget to be blessed, be positive, and be safe. And until next time, peace.